is Minnesota giving them sanctuary? It's disgusting.
President Trump is heading to the Motor City to tour a Detroit Ford factory and tout his administration's economic wins. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
We have mortgage rates that are falling under 6% for the first time in years. Today, the national average of gasoline is the lowest that it's been in 5 years. We have core inflation at its lowest level in 5 years. And so with a little bit of patience, the American people are going to continue to see that the best is yet to come. And in 2026, people in Michigan and in every state across the country are going to see more money in their pockets thanks to President Trump's Working Families tax cut that he signed into law last year.
Today, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in two major cases that will shape the future of female sports. Specifically, the question is whether states can prevent biological males from competing against females. Madison Kenyon is an Idaho student athlete who lost a competition to a male athlete.
This is an opportunity that the Supreme Court has to tell women that we matter, that our sports matter, and that this bill that we are advocating for is truth, and it respects women, it respects biology, and it respects fairness. It would preserve fairness in our sports, because when you don't do that, women's sports loses its integrity.
A conservative columnist says the torching of a Jewish synagogue in Mississippi shows that the ugly face of anti-Semitism can emerge anywhere, even in a conservative state like Mississippi.
There's just one Jewish synagogue in Mississippi's capital city of Jackson. The Beth Israel congregation was established there in 1860, but recently the institution suffered extensive damage by an arson fire. Police have arrested Stephen Spencer Pittman, who has admitted lighting a fire inside the building, quote, due to the building's Jewish ties. According to an affidavit filed in the U.S. District Court in Mississippi, Pittman referred to the synagogue as the, quote, synagogue of Satan. Robert Knight is a columnist for the Washington Times.
The ugly face of anti-Semitism can emerge anywhere, even in a conservative state like Mississippi. Although it did happen in a very left-wing city, Jackson. Democratic Party has run that city into the ground over the last few years.
But still, Knight says it's shocking that a synagogue could be burned down in Mississippi.
I'm a Christian who supports Israel, who supports America's Jews, and have Jewish friends, and I'm very concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism, and I hope the federal government puts a lot of resources into crushing it and prosecuting anyone who makes Jews feel like their lives are threatened in this country.
The congregation's president, Zach Schemper, vowed to rebuild the synagogue and said several churches had offered their spaces for worship during the rebuilding process. I'm Chad Groening.
More news online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty P.
AFA Action takes attacks on the family seriously. The enemies of the family constantly employ new tactics to try to sneak past our radar. They know if we stand together, their evil plans will fail. Your gift to AFA Action allows us to stay vigilant against their onslaught. And if you give this month, you'll receive access to the Cultural Institute video When Your Faith is Illegal by Frank Harbor on AFA Stream as our thanks. You can make your gift today at afaaction.net.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, January 13th, and Florida, my home state, has long been heralded as the greatest state in the union because we have an excellent governor, Ron DeSantis, who plans to outline his key goals in the State of the State address before lawmakers today around 11 a.m. And a lot going on in his final legislative session as governor. He's also announced a special legislative session over redistricting. So all of these priorities, of course, someone like Governor DeSantis can cram into one legislative cycle. But let's welcome in Governor Ron DeSantis to give us his view, an overview of what he plans for the state. So good morning, Governor, and what is the preview of what you plan to address in the State of the State?
Well, I'm mindful of 2026 represents America's 250th anniversary. And when the founders made that fateful leap to seek independence and later created a constitution, they were well aware that they were going against the tide of history. Republics had typically failed. But they also knew that what they did was just setting the foundation, that it would ultimately be future generations of Americans that would have to cultivate the freedom. I mean, Ben Franklin said, a republic if you can keep it. So I think as we're in this year, we look around the country and see so many examples of, can these self-government endure, and the failures that we see in a lot of these leftist states. I think Florida is an example of showing what can be done in a successful way. I think we're faithful to the founders' vision of the type of society and opportunity and freedom that they wanted to see. I think that we've been able to address huge issues and deliver really, really big results. So I think, one, it'll just be a time to reflect on the achievements and on the success. So much of modern politics is fluff. So much of it is posturing. What are you actually doing to deliver meaningful results? And we've done that more than any place in the country. You did mention some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. I mean, one is, we have probably the strongest budget situation the state has ever had. We want to continue doing that. Since I've been governor, we've paid down half of the state's 180-year debt, over 180 years. We've done half of it, gotten rid of half of it just in my tenure. We want to keep that momentum up. We've obviously cut a lot of taxes. We have very low spending, but we also have an issue with local governments and property taxes. And so that has pinched a lot of homeowners. That's not anything that we control at the state level directly. But what we are going to do is work with the legislature to get a ballot initiative on the Constitution, or on the ballot, so that voters will have an ability to vote themselves exemption, particularly on their personal residence, from these crushing property taxes. And there'll be a lot of other things, that we'll be dealing with in the course of the session. But, the reality is self-government is not easy. You see it failing in California and New York and Chicago. Florida's an example where it's succeeding and shows what can be done if you have the right philosophy and you have the courage of your convictions.
So well said. And what you're actually doing for Florida, and what Blaise Ngolia, what James Othmeyer, and so many other great conservatives in Florida are doing to deliver real results. I think the voters see that. So many people have moved to this state because of Florida's leadership. And one of the big questions that will be over this next year is the future of Florida, and who will succeed you. And your Lieutenant Governor, Jay Collins, announced his run for governor. Former House Speaker Paul Renner is in. There are, a couple of other candidates. You've said that Byron Donalds doesn't reflect your policy. Do you currently see a candidate that, in your view, does? And do you plan to jump into that race for in terms of an endorsement for Florida's future?
Well, I could. I mean, I think if you look at, since I've been governor, I get involved in primaries, when I have someone I believe in and someone that really reflects what I think the state needs, and that is really bold in that. And, that's just something people have to prove as they announce candidacies and get out there and do it. I think the lieutenant governor was a senator in Florida, had a really strong conservative record, supported us on a lot of key things that were really meaningful. Obviously has a great history as a Green Beret and serving in special forces, which I know a lot of people in Florida, really appreciate. Paul Renner was the speaker when I was governor my first 2 years of my second term. And I think if you look at that, probably there's not a single state in the history of the Republican Party that delivered more meaningful reforms during that period of time. And so he deserves credit for that. So ultimately, these guys got to get out there and make the case. But I do think that there are a lot of insiders. There are a lot of people who, the voters would never necessarily see, that they're kind of behind the scenes. A lot of them have resisted everything I've done at every turn. I mean, they haven't had the popular support to actually win any of those fights. But I do think that there's kind of an appetite that's whetted in kind of the internal bowels of Tallahassee and some of the swamp of Florida politics. They want to go back to the good old boys and business as usual. There's no question about that. And so I think that's an underlying thing that the voters are going to have to sort out as this thing starts to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that also represents and reflects national politics as well as we head into the midterms and then also 2028. And it's fascinating to me that anyone would see what has happened in Florida over the last 2 terms that you have been governor and want to go back to anything prior or the 2 terms of Donald Trump and want to go back to kind of an establishment GOP. And so what is your strategy heading into this legislative session to deliver on those priorities and to overcome maybe some of those challenges that the resistors in Tallahassee gave even as early as last cycle?
Yeah, look, I think we're probably in pretty good shape. I mean, I think some of the things that, you're going to do, I mean, the redistricting, that's going to get done. There's going to be something on the ballot for property tax. The voters are demanding it. I don't think these guys would be able to go back and run in their primaries and run for re-election without giving voters an opportunity to do that. And I anticipate, things that we've been able to accomplish in education and budget and tax, all that is going to continue. So I feel confident about that, but I think, obviously in the future. And the one thing that I've noticed, Trump's first term, a lot of the establishment Republicans didn't think he could win, and then he won. It was like a big surprise, but a lot of them were not necessarily supportive. I mean, the Russia collusion investigations were started by Republicans back then. Now, I opposed that at the time. I was one of the few, but that's kind of where it was. And so when I first became governor, a lot of those guys, they kept their distance from Trump. I think what's happened now is the squishes, they view, saying they're for Trump, rhetorically wearing a Make America Great Again, they view that as their inoculation against conservative voters who may not like that they're squishy, right? And so they think as long as they do that and say the rhetoric, then they can behave in ways that are not conservative. And I don't think the voters are going to accept that. You did see that last year a little bit in some of the things you mentioned, but I see that around the country where it's just a different posture. And I think the folks that don't want to be conservative, they think if they just rhetorically lean in and say they support President Trump, then the voters aren't going to look any deeper than that. And I don't think that ultimately is going to fly. I think the voters are going to look to see what you did, especially when you're in a midterm situation where President Trump's not going to be on the ballot. So you've got to show that, you deserve their support. And I think the only way you get a strong enough turnout to be able to salvage Congress is to run on a good conservative record of accomplishments. And I know certainly in Congress they have some more work to do there.
Yeah, I'm speaking with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis ahead of the State of the State address today around 11 a.m. And Governor, at the end of last year, there was kind of this clash between, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, and a few others, I think, that represent kind of where the conservative movement is at this tipping point leading into 2026. And it's kind of a realignment of what actually shapes conservatism, conservative values, and where we're at as a country moving forward. How would you advise the country and the base of genuine conservatives who love your policy, who love the action that Florida has accomplished, to actually define what it means to be a conservative in 2026? Because I think when we have all of these different factions of America First versus America Only, Florida is great, and then there's MAGA. I mean, kind of a lot of this is getting lost in some of the fluff that you wisely said is most politicians.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think some of these influencer wars, I have a tough time keeping up with it. I must confess, I do not follow it. I really don't find a lot of the stuff that's out there to be informative or entertaining. And it's interesting, yesterday was Rush Limbaugh's birthday, and I think Rush was a friend of mine, so I'm a little bit biased. But Rush was somebody, first, he was very entertaining, but he was also very thoughtful and very conservative. And he would always make the point that, look, conservatism is you can't change it. It's just the truth. It's the recognition of the founding principles that our country was founded on, about human nature and about the proper role of government. Those underlying values and principles do not change. The belief that we're endowed by God with inalienable rights, not given rights from the government. None of that changes. And so I think the question is how do you apply that conservative set of values to the issues before you. And, I think we've had times where you've kind of had these milquetoast establishment Republicans who just refused to fight for the values that the people wanted to see. They were almost embarrassed about standing for conservative principles. What I showed in Florida, I came in, a lot of people thought we were about to become a blue state. Certainly we were a purple state. We were not a red state. And a lot of people told me, hey, trim your sails. You got to have a delicate balance because the state's so evenly divided. And I was just like, you know what? You only live once. I'm going to do what I told the voters I do, what I believe. I'm going to be bold. And I guarantee you, if I'm successful, people are going to follow. And that's exactly what happened. When I got in, there were 300,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. Today, we have 1.4 million more registered Republicans than Democrats. I won the biggest victory that any Republican has ever won in a governor's race in 2022 on the heels of us having a decade of races that were decided by 1 point at the state level. So bold colors, not pale pastels, is what President Reagan used to say. I think ultimately that is what sells and what wins. But you got to be able to apply that in ways, I think, that are coherent and that are delivering results for voters. And so, we've done that across the board. That's part of the reason, we fought Fauci on COVID and kept the state open. That's part of the reason, we've done things like eliminate DEI, the first state to do that in our public education. That's part of the reason we're leading on immigration enforcement. We just had almost 20,000 apprehensions from state and local in Florida that are in addition to what DHS is doing, because we know the rule of law is important. So that's what it is. But the underlying values, Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing. Conservatism is what it is. It's just the truth. It's the enduring principles that make our country great. And I think the task of elected officials is to apply those principles in a way that are advancing the ball for the people that you're elected to serve.
Yeah, an application of principles into actual policy is where the sticking point is and where a lot of politicians and their rhetoric fail to advance. And so you've also talked about the redistricting special session. Of course, the left is pushing back on that and suggesting that that is, somehow trying to rig elections and all of their different talking points on that. But what's actually going on with redistricting for this special session, and why is that an important application of conservative principles?
Well, first of all, there's really three things to point out. One, we should have had 2 seats in the last census. We only got 1 because Biden came in and changed the analysis. Texas should have had 3. They only got 2. So it's already been rigged against us because of how Biden published the census. Second, there is a Supreme Court decision pending on the Voting Rights Act and whether that mandates racial gerrymandering or even prohibits it, and that's going to impact Florida's map. So, and almost assuredly, we're going to have to redraw because we have some of those VRA districts that in previous iterations people were said, hey, you have to do this way. Supreme Court's likely going to say no to that, and so that's going to change things. And then the third thing is Florida's had 10, 15 years worth of population growth just in the last 4 years. So our districts are not well apportioned. Floridians, are not getting equal representation based on where they live because people have moved into different parts of the state. So doing that, I think, is going to be more of a fair representation. Now, the Democrats don't like it. Now, Florida, you don't do the gerrymandering like California. You have to draw coherent districts. That's how the Constitution is, and I'm sure that's what the legislature will enact when they do it. But the reality is, when you go from 300,000 more Democrats to 1.4 million more Republicans, the state is just a lot more Republican than it was. So any coherent map is going to reflect the underlying changes of the political demography.
Well said. And Governor Ron DeSantis, we'll take a break here, but I so appreciate your time this morning, and we'll be interested to tune into the State of the State address and look forward to everything that will be accomplished still in Florida. And I think it's really wise advice that the people of Florida need to look for ourselves. I'm a voter here in Florida, and look at the candidates, look at their record for every office, but especially for someone who's going to succeed such a great legacy and the last 8 years of Governor Ron DeSantis, and decide for ourselves who deserves to be the next governor of Florida. We'll be talking about that, of course, a lot throughout this year, and we'll be right back with more.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Abe, what if you were a new believer, eager to grow in your faith, but you had no Bible? You'd say, well, I'd go to a Christian bookstore, have a company ship me one. Well, what if those weren't options? That's the way it is for literally millions of Bible-less believers in the regions of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. They've been denied God's Word, but oh, the joy that comes when they finally receive a Bible.
When I got the Bible, I really love to read, and because of those reading, God is really blessing my heart.
AFR listening family, you've been incredibly kind to bless 14,000 Bible-less believers. We're at the end of a months-long campaign to bless 16,000. We've got 2,000 to go by January 15th, so at $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20, $500 sends 100. Would you pray and help us finish strong January 15th? Abe?
You can give by calling 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, and I hope you're looking forward to a wonderful 2026. Let me tell you about a couple of things you might be interested in that we're going to go on. Those are tours. We call them spiritual heritage tours. We're going this year in June and September to Washington, D.C. and George Washington's Mount Vernon. We're also going to Colonial Williamsburg and the historic Jamestown settlement. Then we're going also to Boston, Massachusetts. So all those tours are coming up in 2026. The D.C. and Williamsburg trip are both in June and September, so pick the month you want to go. The Boston trip is in September. So, for all the information, the itinerary, the cost, everything you need to know about these tours, if you want to join us on a vacation with a purpose, that's what we call it, go to wildmangroup.com. WILDMON group.com is the website. Find out all the information, and we'll see you on one of our 2026 tours.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stern. Stand by for news and commentary next. It had been a long day for a deputy in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. In the middle of his 16-hour shift, he dropped by the Starbucks in Norwalk for a cup of coffee. When the deputy got his order, he noticed one of the Starbucks baristas had drawn a pig on the outside of his cup. And Lord only knows what they may have done to the liquid inside the cup. Sheriff Robert Luna is furious, rightfully so, says Starbucks ought to be ashamed, calling the artwork extremely offensive and unacceptable. Starbucks apologized, said they're taking swift action. Let's hope that happens. The deputy said the entire ordeal was discouraging and disrespectful, putting his life on the line every day only to be mocked by a glorified waitress at an overpriced coffee joint. Well, I have a lot more to say about this story on my website, and you can also see the offensive artwork. ToddStearns.com. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, Trump's DOJ has opened a probe into the Federal Reserve's Powell, drawing backlash from lawmakers. That's the headline from Politico. The move, they say, is a sharp escalation of Trump's clash with the Fed chief, who he has pushed to lower interest rates. The Justice Department has opened that criminal investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's statements to Congress regarding renovations of the Fed's headquarters in Washington, according to Powell, making a sharp escalation of President Trump's crusade against the Fed chief. He's long pushed Powell to cut interest rates, and the central bank leader framed the latest action in starkly political terms, arguing that the administration was solely motivated by the president's desire for dramatically lower borrowing costs. This coming as Trump has said that he is going to cap any credit card interest at 10% for the whole year, making some other moves on the economy. But what does this actually signal about the priorities for America heading into 2026? Well, let's welcome in Jim Nels, who is an author. You can follow him at Real Jim Nels on social media. And Jim, good morning. Where are we actually heading into 2026? Are we on stable economic footing, or are we just kind of masking some of these deeper structural problems with some of these headlines?
No, I think the country's in great economic shape right now. We'll see what the consumer price index is in a few minutes when that gets released. But last month's number was very good. If you look at the crosstabs in the jobs report that came out last week, we're seeing more American-born Americans getting jobs. We're seeing better jobs. We're seeing more people return to the workplace because they want to go back to work. We're also seeing wages start to go up as we deport illegals who are in this country, thus driving the wages up because they depress wages. And also they are reducing the demand for rental housing, which is causing rental housing prices to come down for Americans. So I think we're in good shape there. Some of these other headlines, I don't know if they're just noise to distract from other things or just personal vendettas. I am not a fan of Chairman Powell, but I think this is probably a mistake to be going after him criminally at this point. So I think that is going to ensure that once his chairmanship is up, he will refuse to resign from the Board of Governors, and he'll be a thorn in the president's side for the rest of the president's term.
Yeah, you know, some of these fights aren't necessarily the fights perhaps that Trump needs to be fighting, and some of these other things that the DOJ could actively look into, like the Minnesota fraud, seems to be a little bit stronger of a priority there. But Jim Nels, what are the indicators that you're watching that will tell us where the economy is headed for 2026? And whether this is actually getting strengthened or weakening? I think a lot of Americans, especially the conservative voting base, are looking for Trump to, as much as possible, get us back to where we were pre-COVID.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, it's a hard message for anyone in the administration to get through when you have to sell something that you're trying to do in 10 and 15-second sound bites. The challenge with getting us back to pre-COVID levels is that we had about 28% inflation during the Biden administration. So even if Trump is able to cut prices, you know, reduce that inflation in half, you're still up 14%. So even though we're seeing great activity in the price of gasoline coming down to lows, we're starting to see the housing market tick up. We're seeing the rental market get better. People still go to the grocery store and they see how much it costs to leave the grocery store, and that becomes the kitchen counter issue, the kitchen table issue that people talk about. There needs to be more messaging about what they're doing. There needs to be more messaging about what's coming. And again, I think if you stop picking fights with people like Jerome Powell and just let him go away, then you'll have more time to get that message across.
Yeah, really well said. And, you know, there's a lot of, I think, frustration as well that while, you know, Trump is focused on some things that are good priorities, some things we could say, you know, might be not quite the correct fights and all that, it doesn't really seem like Congress is prioritizing really doing anything that is even close to codifying some of Trump's executive orders or really taking that mandate from the American people and looking toward any legislation that actually benefits Americans. So heading into the midterm year, what are some important priorities that Congress should set as an agenda that would benefit and boost the economy, especially when we're looking at how much Doge uncovered and all of this fraud in Minnesota. I mean, there's billions and billions of taxpayer funds that obviously are being misused and could be either appropriated elsewhere, or hey, maybe we could not have as much as high of a federal income tax rate. I mean, I think that would be something that literally everybody would rejoice about. And if Democrats think that they want to give more to the IRS, hey, they're welcome to send a check.
There you go. I think that if Congress could actually do something, which I'm very dubious about them being able to do, I would love to see them go after more of this waste, fraud, and abuse and try to get billions of dollars that way. But they don't want to do that because it's primarily the Democrat constituents who are committing the waste, fraud, and abuse. So they're not going to attack their own constituents. I would love to see Congress start talking about another tax cut. I would like to see the corporate tax rate come down. I'd like to see the death tax come down. And I would like to see the federal income tax come down. There's no reason why we can't lower taxes for Americans, give them more money to spend, and collect more money in things like sales tax as opposed to just personal income tax, which is basically you taking my money before I have a chance to do anything with it, which I'm very much opposed to. But I think that that's going to not happen. I think that they're going to spend all their time fighting about Obamacare subsidies. They're going to spend their time saying that we're not going to approve the new Federal Reserve chairman because you attacked Powell. They're going to spend their time doing that because that gets them on the air on places like CNN and MSNBC. What Trump needs to also be doing, though, is selling what he's done with foreign policy. We got rid of the dictator in Venezuela. Cuba is days, if not weeks, away from falling, and the regime in Iran looks like it's done. That's a huge accomplishment, basically before Martin Luther King Day in January, right? So, sell those things and then ask Congress to act. Come back with a prioritized list for Congress. Say, this is what I want done before the midterm elections, and let them have to explain why they can't get it done.
Yeah, and it does seem like there is more of an emphasis, at least right now, from the Trump administration on some of these foreign policy wins, absolutely. But do you think that the message of actually trying to change or lower income taxes and some of these things that he started out his second term with, like related to Doge. I mean, it seemed like the economy was a much bigger priority at the beginning of 2025 than it appears to be in 2026. And how does the administration need to balance that heading into the midterms, where I think, people are very happy with what's going on in the foreign policy world, if you're a conservative, obviously. But I think there is a real lack of prioritization of some of these domestic issues. And where's the balance?
The balance is really, really difficult to do that. And gosh, Jenna, if I had the perfect answer to that, I'd write the book or go make a ton of money as a consultant in D.C. But, what they really need to do is let people like Marco Rubio continue to get out there and talk about what they've done from a foreign policy perspective and what they've achieved. And then have Trump and J.D. Vance, so you can set J.D. Vance up for election in 2028. Let them talk about, affordability, which is the new catchphrase, right? Like I said, the consumer price index just came out. It's at 2.7% for the year, still above the 2% rate we're looking for, but it's coming down and holding steady. So that's good. Most people don't know what the consumer price index means, but what they have to talk about is things like the price of gas has come down, $2 a gallon is now the lowest it's been since 2017. The price of eggs has been cut by, $1.50 a dozen since Joe Biden left office. This is more money in your pocket, America. If you want more of the same, we cannot let the Democrats take control of Congress, because if they take control of Congress, all we're going to do for the next 2 years is watch impeachment after impeachment after impeachment of the president.
Yeah, and everybody sees that, Jim Nels. I mean, everybody is kind of screaming at the top of our lungs, like, hey, if Democrats get control of Congress in 2026, there's just going to be a slew of impeachments, a total distraction. But I think the frustrating part of that for me, not only does it seem like Congress just really doesn't care, and I've made the argument that maybe they actually want to lose because they want to cripple the Trump administration and try to kind of go back to the establishment heading into 2028. But I think one of the overall bigger frustrations, even, than just what's obvious, is that it seems like Democrats are just so much quicker at actually requiring their version of accountability, which amounts to nothing more than lawfare. But I mean, it was like days after all of the fraud in Minnesota, and then the woman who used her car as a weapon to try to run over an ICE agent and was shot and killed. And Democrats are already suing ICE, calling for impeachment of Kristi Noem. And here we are a year into the Trump administration's second term, and it's like there have been zero arrests of people who actually deserve accountability, not this whole retribution, lawfare nonsense. I'm not for lawfare regardless of what party, but actual accountability for things. It seems like the Republicans are just so slow, and all they do are these strongly worded letters, these hearings in Congress, and then it never amounts to anything because then the Democrats just distract with the next news cycle.
I mean, Democrats care nothing more than that strongly worded letter, right? But, seriously, what the Democrats are good at and what the Republicans can't seem to do is messaging and alignment. Think about it. When the Democrats decide to get behind an issue, they all get behind the issue. You don't hear, their version of, say, Rand Paul or Massey or any of these guys coming out there with their moral superiority, and I'm going to, take a no vote on this just based on principle. They fall in line because they're afraid of not having the support of the Democratic machine for fundraising. Republicans don't do the same thing, and they're not good at the messaging. The messaging on this whole stuff with ICE should be what other crimes should go unpunished. Should we let murderers walk free? Should we let rapists walk free? You tell us where the line is, right? Because if you look at who they're deporting mostly rapists and killers and child molesters. But if you happen to be hanging out in a child molester's house and you're there illegally when the ICE guys come in, they're not going to let you go. They're going to take you too. And the argument of, well, you're separating families, every time someone goes to jail, a family gets separated. Again, where do you draw the line? But the Republicans are not good at that 15-second soundbite about that message and communicating that message in a way that the average American will understand. The best person at that right now is probably Tom Homan, and he doesn't get as much airtime as he probably should.
Yeah. So well said. And, Governor DeSantis joined me earlier in the program. And one of the great things that he said as well is that so many politicians just have kind of this fluff and this rhetoric. But then when it comes to taking decisive action and putting principles into action, that's where the failure is. And I think that perfectly encapsulates largely where the Republican Party is and the frustration on the federal level that Trump probably has right now with Congress. But he is doing as much, I think, from the executive probably as he can. I mean, maybe, we could critique one or two things or say, obviously, the DOJ, I think, could be doing a lot more. But in the last 2 minutes I have with you, Jim Nels, I also wanted to ask you about Trump's push for Greenland. The headline from Fox News was Trump says Greenland's defense is 2 dog sleds as he pushes for U.S. acquisition of the territory. And he warned that Russia and China will move in if the U.S. doesn't act. And it looks like more of a strategic partnership agreement rather than an actual territory or certainly not statehood sort of acquisition. But where do you see this potentially going in 2026? And could it be as early as this year that we see some kind of movement there?
I think you're going to start seeing movement towards, like you said, a strategic partnership. Maybe there's room for Greenland as the 52nd state after we take over Canada. But let's see where that goes. But quite frankly, if you look at what's in Greenland, you have some rare earth minerals. You have a strategic location when it comes to the defense of the Arctic, as well as early warning for submarines and missile launches should that happen coming out of there. Greenland's always been strategic. Denmark's never cared about Greenland until we showed interest in them. So I think if it comes down to the people of Greenland having an opportunity to have their input put into this, they're going to say, hey, we'd much rather align ourselves with the United States and have that protection than have Denmark be the ones who are going to protect us against Russia and China.
Yeah, well said. Well, we got to take a break here, but Jim Nels, really appreciate your time this morning. And again, you can follow him at Real Jim Nels, and he has a lot of really great articles out all the time. So go and read everything that he writes. And, for a lot of the people that I have come on this show and commentators, like Jim Nels, it's because they write really good commentary that I think is worth reading. And so definitely follow, some people if you want your algorithm on social media to maybe be a little bit better, follow the people who are worth following. So he is at Real Jim Nels, and we will be right back with more.
Every weekday, strengthen your family and your faith with Family Talk.
I had the same brain when I was at the bottom of the class that I had at the top of the class. Exactly the same brain, but a different attitude. What does that tell us about our responsibility to develop the intellect of the people in our spheres of influence?
Don't miss Family Talk with Dr. James Dobson every weekday at 6:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. Central on AFR.
Life can be hard, but we have to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. I'm Christy Graham, host of On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, and I want to encourage you in your walk with God. Listen each week as we go behind the scenes of our work around the world. You'll be challenged and encouraged in your own faith as you hear how God is actively changing lives. Join us for On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, Sundays at 8:30 a.m. Central, right here on American Family Radio.
The heartbeat of a baby in the womb, heard through ultrasound, is one of the most beautiful sounds you can hear. But abortion stops that heartbeat before a baby is ever born. Preborn saves the lives of babies by letting a pregnant mother see their baby and hear the heartbeat with a free ultrasound.
My name is Mary. I'm calling from Tennessee. Recently, I have a granddaughter who will be 2, and her mom connected with Preborn.
When a mother hears the heartbeat on ultrasound, her baby's chance for life dramatically improves. Through the years, Preborn has saved the lives of 400,000 babies. And beyond that, thousands of young mothers have found salvation in Jesus. You can help with a donation to Preborn. January 19th through 23rd will be Preborn Week on AFR. Our goal is to raise support for 5,000 free ultrasounds. Be listening and help support Preborn. Your love can save a life.
So right now may be the perfect time for you to rethink how you pay for health care. And here's why. This time of year is decision time for a lot of people, but it's also when you can join MediShare and save even more than usual. For many families, joining MediShare means saving about $500 a month, which is a game changer for a lot of people. More than 1 million people are now part of healthcare sharing because it just makes so much sense, especially right now. And MediShare is the gold standard. Members like it a lot. We know this from member surveys. MediShare has been around for over 30 years. It is a proven thing. And if you join before January 15th and you mention the promo code SHARE, they'll waive your application fee, so you save $100 right off the bat. I'll give you the number here in a second, but just call. You'll get a price within 2 minutes. And again, the deadline is January 15th, so call now. You'll save even more. Here's the number. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE, 833-44-BIBLE.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, it's 2026, and we are still talking about what the definition of sex is, which is utterly ridiculous because even children know there is a difference biologically, inherently, immutably between men and women, but yet somehow we're still talking about it, and we're talking about it today at the U.S. Supreme Court as they hear arguments over trans athletes in girls' sports. And this is actually 2 cases for oral arguments that could determine, according to Fox News whether states can ban transgender athletes who identify as women from competing on girls' and women's sports teams, a legal fight that could have far-reaching implications on transgender policies across the country. So the arguments in those two cases, Little versus Hecox and West Virginia versus BPJ, will examine state bans on transgender athletes participating in school sports under Title IX and the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. So at issue is whether the laws in Idaho and West Virginia that prohibit transgender athletes who identify as women from playing on teams that match their gender identity discriminate based on sex. So it'll be very interesting to see especially where Justice Gorsuch stands on this. And oral arguments start today at 10 a.m. You can listen now to those live or go back and listen to them. I prefer C-SPAN because it actually tells you which justice or attorney advocate is speaking at that time, so it's a little easier to keep track because you don't have video. But the other gender question mark at the Supreme Court was filed late last week when the Thomas More Society filed an emergency request with the U.S. Supreme Court after the Ninth Circuit allowed California gender secrecy policies to resume. So for more on that, let's go to Paul Jenna, who is special counsel for the Thomas More Society and a partner at Lamondre and Jenna LLP. And you might remember him as my former colleague with the Thomas More Society and representing Pastor John MacArthur. Paul is just such an excellent attorney. And so, Paul, really appreciate you joining. And what is the basis of this emergency request?
Great to be with you, Jenna. Yes, so we obtained a kind of a one-of-its-kind statewide, class-wide permanent injunction blocking the state of California from enforcing these what we call gender secrecy policies in schools, which were state mandated. And the permanent injunction we obtained was on behalf of basically all parents and teachers statewide who object. And Attorney General Rob Bonta immediately asked the Ninth Circuit to stay that ruling, and the three-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit did grant that emergency request sort of during the holidays. And so now we are asking the Supreme Court to vacate that stay, and in the alternative, to take the case up on the merits as well. So that's a very short overview. Yeah. And so, so these policies are basically,
you've termed it California's parental deception scheme. And I think that's a really wise articulation of what's going on. And so, among the plaintiffs, as Thomas More Society has laid out, are devout Catholic parents who were never told their junior high daughter was being treated as a male at school for nearly a year. They only learned the truth after she attempted suicide. And so, when you're talking about these gender secrecy policies, it really means that these state-funded schools are not telling parents the truth about what's happening in schools.
They're very dangerous policies. Essentially, they require schools to unhesitatingly accept a student's assertion of their gender identity and not to disclose the gender identity to the parents unless the student consents. And these are kids as young as 5. They can ask to be referred to with new names, new pronouns. No questions are asked. No mental health assessment is made. They just have to go with the new name and pronouns that the 5-year-old tells them. And the parents are left in the dark. And in fact, the school has 2 sets of rosters. They have one that they go, one set of names they use at school, and then if the kid doesn't want the parents to know, they have to use the legal names and biological pronouns when speaking to parents. So it's actively deceiving parents, leaving them in the dark on something that's so fundamental to their child, like their identity. And in the case of the one that you mentioned, Child Poe, in our case, tragically, we see how these policies can affect kids in real life. She literally was so disturbed and so distraught by all of this, she tried to take her own life, and it was only after her failed suicide attempt the doctor said, "Did you know she was actually identifying as a boy at school?" And they had no idea. So these are dangerous policies.
Yeah, and it's so obviously wrong and obviously not in the best interests of the child, but also overriding parental rights to know what's going on with their own child at school. And this is just, furtherance of the leftist mentality that children belong to the state, not the parents. But what is California's argument that somehow this is even the best interests of the child to leave the parents in the dark? I mean, it doesn't seem like they would even be able to mount that type of argument just on the merits anyway.
Yeah, their arguments really don't hold up. They've been rejected not only in federal court but in state court. Their main argument is, well, students have privacy rights, and under the privacy clause of the California Constitution, they don't have to, parents don't have to know this information. Little kids have these privacy rights where the whole school essentially knows their identity, but the parents don't get to know it. It's really a nonsensical argument. State courts have rejected it. Our federal court rejected it. They've also said, there's equal protection arguments, anti-discrimination, but all of those don't hold up when you're comparing them against, federal constitutional rights of parents and of teachers, the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment. So the judge in our case did a very detailed analysis, said, look, whatever rights you think justify this scheme are obviously trumped by the federal constitutional rights of parents and teachers. And so our case kind of has the full spectrum of claims represented. We have First Amendment claims for parents, 14th Amendment claims for parents, and then First Amendment claims for teachers as well, free speech and free exercise. And so it's a great vehicle to have this issue kind of addressed once and for all, because these policies, unfortunately, are nationwide now.
Yeah. This isn't just California, even though that has seemed to be the tip of the spear with, a lot of this gender, priority nonsense. But in terms of the posture of the case, and so this is an emergency request after the Ninth Circuit allowed, the gender policies to resume. So basically just saying, halt everything until we get to the merits. What is the likelihood of the Supreme Court just taking this up on the merits at this point, or how do you anticipate the procedural, all of this to play out?
So we're actually in a pretty favorable posture here because we already prevailed at the trial court, and the Ninth Circuit sort of took the extraordinary step of staying a well-reasoned 52-page permanent injunction ruling after a full period of discovery, 25 depositions. So we're not, asking the Supreme Court to do anything really incredible here. It's just to vacate that Ninth Circuit order so that our trial court order can stay in force during the appeal. So I think the standard there is pretty favorable for us. As far as taking up the case, I actually think there's a decent chance that they'll seriously consider that because there's another case pending before the Supreme Court. Actually, there's been 6 cases that have sought Supreme Court review dealing with these issues, but there's, I think, 3 active cert petitions and one in particular that's being 2 actually that are being conferenced in the near future. So I think this is an issue that circuit courts have sort of wrestled with and gotten wrong, and I think there's a good chance that they're just going to want to resolve this once and for all, especially since the circuit courts are really ignoring controlling Supreme Court precedent on this stuff.
Yeah, it does seem like the Supreme Court is eager to take up and resolve, some of these questions on gender. And, yet you have the recent, I think it was 2018 case in Bostock where, Gorsuch for the majority just inexplicably reading into the term sex in federal law that obviously just meant, the difference between men and women, and reading into that sexual orientation, gender identity. Are some of these cases, in your mind, an opportunity to revisit that and sort of stop all of this, gender confusion nonsense once and for all?
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the case that you mentioned. That's going to be the cases that are going to be argued today. I think there's lots of different ways to look at these issues, and I think we've presented one of the easiest for this specific issue of gender secrecy policies, and that's a First Amendment challenge for parents under the Mahmoud case, which is a very strong opinion that came out last year, and I think the circuit courts are just ignoring the opinion. Essentially, in that case, it was parents had the right to opt out their children from lessons that were reading, these same-sex story books to kids, and so there was a First Amendment right, the Supreme Court said, to opt out of that instruction. And so, how much more serious is it? Reading those books to kids is serious, but how much more serious is it where you're allowing schools to secretly transition your kids? So yeah. We're arguing parents should obviously have the right to opt out of those policies. So I think that's a very easy way for the Supreme Court to deal with this. And so I think as far as the broader gender-related issues, I agree. There's different strategies for different types of cases, but this one really is focused on the First Amendment and then the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, and and it's a great point that while we hope as conservatives and and for protections under the Constitution, God-given rights, pre-political, all of that, that the Supreme Court should stop these ridiculous gender-related policies, and that's one side of the coin. But the other is to strengthen parental rights and the fundamental rights of parents to not only know what's going on with their child, but make the best decision on behalf of their minor child. I mean, to say, this is happening with kids even 5 years old, I mean, that's just utterly absurd. And so how would you define the constitutional boundary between parental rights and what the allegation is here of a state interest in student confidentiality or safety? I mean, there are some obvious limits, but overridingly, the Supreme Court should be strengthening parental rights as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is there's the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on scope of parental rights goes back to 1800s. There's so many cases discussing the importance of the parents' role in directing their children's upbringing, directing their formation. In this case, it's actually also directing their medical care. I mean, because as we've seen, these policies, allow socially transitioning a kid has serious psychological and mental health effects. And we have expert testimony. In fact, I forgot to mention this in response to your earlier question, the state's own experts could not defend these policies. I mean, everyone has to acknowledge kids are going to do better if their parents are informed, aware, and supportive. I mean, no kid is going to do better off with, living a double life where their parents don't know their identity at school. It's so obvious and so, crazy that we have to have litigation over this. But no, I do think this is one of those clear areas where this is within the scope of their parental right, and we're just, we have to establish that once and for all before more harm is done to young kids.
Yeah, and and the left always consistently says, there's no evidence of of harm as it relates to like the parents, but there's so much, that can harm the child and all that if you don't allow all this gender nonsense. But the facts bear otherwise, that clearly when, and especially in the instance that you described of one of your own plaintiffs, that this type of delusion and for adults participating in that type of delusion and advancing it and then creating this wedge between teachers and parents and all this. I mean, none of this just makes sense logically. And yet this is just clearly an advancement of politics and policies and a worldview that California and other leftist states want to advance. And so the harm really only goes one direction. And I don't see how the left can, in good faith, argue otherwise.
Well, that's actually something that I found quite ironic, which is that their emergency petition to the Ninth Circuit said, this order is going to sow chaos throughout the state. We need an emergency, stay of the order. And if you look at the order, it's like so clear. Don't lie to parents. Tell them the truth. Don't force teachers to deceive parents. If parents ask for records, give them records. I mean, so complying with that injunction is going to sow chaos in the state of California. That's what the Attorney General said. So
yeah.
it's. I think they need to be called out, and I think that's what that's what we're doing, and hopefully the Supreme Court steps in and we can get this resolved once and for all.
Well, thanks so much, Paul Jenna, and we do need to be praying for the Supreme Court to do the right thing, protect the fundamental rights of parents, act in the best interests of children in both of these cases. And so you can follow Paul Jenna at Paul Jenna, Jonna, on X, and also the Thomas More Society. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.